Thank you so much. We are really very, very honored. We just learned it just before the session started. So thank you to the committee. Actually, it puts a pressure on us now, I think. But okay, let me just point to my colleague author, Frandsen. Unfortunately, the third author, Helle Aggerholm, couldn't be here, and I myself is Winni Johansen. Well, what we are going to present here is actually part of an overall collaborative research project called the Internal Crisis Management and Crisis Communication in Danish Organizations. We got a grant from the Danish Research Council on approximately 350,000 euros in order to study these aspects for the next 3 years. So the mapping study, the ICMCC survey that we're going to present here is actually the very first beginning of this project. Some of the other elements is a study of crisis perception and crisis preparedness. Thirdly, a study of organizational resilience, internal crisis communication and crisis culture, from the idea that what is it that counts? Is it the anticipation and the formal preparedness, or is it a matter of crisis culture or organizational culture and the more informal way of dealing with it? Fourthly, we want to study the influence of the news media on the internal crisis communication and the understanding and reactions among our employees in relation to corporate crisis. But let me now turn to the study that we have done a paper on for this BledCom conference. Well, it's a survey mapping the internal crisis management and crisis communication in private companies and in public organizations, namely the municipalities in Denmark. And what was the purpose of it? Well, it was to study how middle managers, chief communication officers and/or human resource managers who are responsible for crisis management perceive, plan, coordinate, and implement internal crisis management and crisis communication. The theoretical framework for this, well, we're working within crisis communication from a strategic, proactive, and process-oriented approach, meaning that to us, crisis communication takes place before a crisis situation, but also during, of course, and after. We're also working with a theoretical framework about internal stakeholders, because the employees or the internal stakeholders as such are actually psychologically closer to the organization than other stakeholders. And thirdly, we are working with an interactive communication model, because employees are not just passive people, they are very active, in fact, participating, taking own communicative initiatives during a crisis situation, during a change situation, or in general. Maybe we should add to this, because we have heard a lot about how to define internal communication today, that we see an organization as an open social system. An organization is a very porous organization where things goes in and out. So we can't just figure an organization being a container into which you put something named internal communication. So we have to reflect on what's going in and out, and especially in a crisis situation. The research design, well, we did it in March and April, so it's really quite recently, and the total sample consisted of 237 respondents, 166 from private organizations with a response rate of 45%, and 71 municipalities out of 98 in total in Denmark, giving a response rate of 72. We had 36 questions divided into personal information, crisis perception, internal crisis management, and internal crisis communication. And then we wanted to know how they perceive future needs. Thank you. The participants, 89% of them had crisis management as part of their function. 56% were males, and 67% were between 40 and 59 years old. So a rather mature group of people. Now, for the findings, well, first of all, I may tell you that we have a huge amount of data. It's incredible what you get in if you put 36 questions to all these respondents, and we had a lot of open-ended questions too. So this is just a minor part of it that we are going to present here. But for the perception part, we were very much interested in how did these middle managers perceive the reactions of employees during a crisis situation. What kind of reactions were typically, meaning, of course, across crisis types, which could be a bit problematic, but anyway, they had to try to figure out what would be the most common crisis type in their organization and try to answer the questions from that standpoint. And what they came out with was that employees are feeling frustrated, insecure, they are getting afraid, and they need more information. At the same time, there is more informal communication going on, and employees are losing confidence in top management very often. There are more rumors, and motivation and engagement are damaged among many employees. Only some of them were considered as becoming passive or feeling sorrow, and only a very few feel betrayed, ashamed, or in panic. This was actually quite interesting because Ian Mitrov has done a study where he's saying that all employees in every kind of crisis situation feel betrayed, actually. So maybe there's something to discuss here. And the feeling of community or belonging continues to be strong, and employees do not leave the organization. But remember, this is in 2011. Maybe due to the financial crisis, there could be some explanation there. For the crisis management part, well, for the formal crisis preparedness, 71% of the private companies and 87% of municipalities have a crisis plan. And although the municipalities may seem better equipped in terms of formal plans, they have less focus on the internal dimensions compared to the private organizations. Actually, 72% of the organizations have a formally appointed crisis team. Within this group, 91% of the private and only 82% of the public have a team member being responsible for the internal crisis communication part. We also found that the size matters. There's a strong relationship between size and formal crisis management. The bigger a company or bigger an organization, the more likely they are to have plans, teams, formal steps to assure internal coordination, to actively try to create an open crisis culture. And for the private companies, we also saw, and this was quite interesting, that many of them have whistleblower arrangements. This was not the case for the public organizations, that they had appointed internal spokespersons and that they were keeping a logbook. For the internal crisis communication part, well, we asked them which channels of communication have been or will be used for internal crisis communication in your organization. And as you may see, well, joint meetings, special meetings, intranet, and email are coming out as, not surprisingly, as the winners, so to say. The blue line is the private companies, and the red line is the public organizations. So there are not that much difference. But what was interesting to see was that, again, there was a strong relationship between the size and the internal crisis communication. The larger, the more likely they were to use departmental meetings, intranet company magazines, newsletters, SMS, blogs, and social media. And actually, we did a study in 2003 where we were studying the general crisis preparedness of organization, and we could see from that that internal crisis communication receives more attention today, that emails and intranet have become as important as face-to-face communication. This was not the case in 2003. And although of less importance, SMS has tripled since 2003. For the internal spokespersons, almost 62% of the organizations have an internal spokesperson in times of crisis. And 74% of the managers were perceived to communicate in order to explain the external messages going out from the company to the employees. They also put up guidelines, what may be communicated on the part of employees, what they are allowed to communicate, how they should communicate externally as well as internally. I'm always finished, almost. Actually, employees are actively involved as ambassadors, and finally, they take communicative initiatives, 66% at workplace, but also at home, and 60% they thought that 60% of the employees were also using social media during a crisis situation. The conclusion, or maybe it's not a conclusion yet, because we still have so many data to analyze, but we could see that they were better prepared than we thought. But when we asked them, what are the needs, what are you need to do in the future, they were saying, firstly, internal coordination, and second, how to integrate what's going on internal and externally on the communication part. So they are very much aware about the belongings of the two fields to one another. The next steps we're going to do is we are going to analyze the differences, we have already done it, between public and private organizations. We hope to present it in Leeds. We are also working with the impact of individual factors on crisis perception, which we are going to present at a crisis communication conference in our city in October 2011. And finally, and now I shall conclude, we also, when we send out this survey, ask the companies and organizations if they would allow us to have their crisis plans. And almost 50 of them send us their crisis plans. So actually we are going to present also what kind of internal dimensions do we find in these crisis plans. Thank you very much.